We discussed this the other night, obviously, when we were watching the footage of the first wave of hostages being freed. We talked about the fact that Israel was quite successful in removing large sections of the senior leadership of Hamas. But we know, of course, that Israel's had to let 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, many of them the worst of the worst, many of them convicted of terrorism, out as part of this deal. So, you know, there's every likelihood that that leadership group of Hamas have just now been reinvigorated and refreshed from these prisoner ranks. And we've also got concern that around 135 of these individuals will head overseas. There's been calls by the opposition to have the government rule out that they might return to Australia. Sorry, not return, but they might end up in Australia. But to date, there's been silence from the Minister, Tony Burke. I mean, are you confident that we will be able to keep out terrorists, either from the prisons or people that are still to come here from Gaza, out of this country?
No, I mean, it's absurd, really, that we're taking people from Gaza when surrounding Arab countries are not. The government is cowardly and treacherous and fatuous on this, the Australian government. They should certainly assure people that no one who has been in an Israeli jail on a terror-related offence or any offence should be coming to Australia under any circumstances on any visa, temporary or long-term, whatsoever. I just think, but the other thing, Peter, is you don't really destroy a terrorist movement by killing its leaders. We saw that with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That's not to say you shouldn't kill its leaders. They're enemies, you're at war with them, go ahead and do that. But it's unrealistic to expect that you destroy Hamas by wiping out its leadership cadre. Not only that, what Hamas is now doing doesn't require very sophisticated leadership. It just requires brutal men with guns who are willing to kill people, murder them and execute them when they're kneeling in front. Well, there are a lot of people in Gaza like that, and even if somehow or other Hamas one day says, OK, we're going out of business, well, the next day, what is it, Palestinian Islamic Jihad or the son of Hamas or Hamas Mark II? I mean, this territory started out anti-Semitic.
This is the problem.
Hamas is an anti-Semitic movement and they've been indoctrinated to hate Jews. Now, it's going to be a long, long time. That's why talk of a two-state solution in the near future is so fatuous. It's going to take decades of normalisation before you can get a normal polity. And by the way, I think it'd be madness to have an election anywhere in the West Bank or Gaza. I mean, elections don't work in the Middle East, and you guarantee Hamas or something like it comes back if you have an election there for local leadership.
Yeah, and I will say, Greg, you know, I've said this, I've written this, the best way, I think the only way to turn around radical Islamism is for good and decent and modern Muslims to say, not in my name, not in the name of our faith. We are leaving this behind us. This is medieval. This belongs in the Dark Ages. This is not how we are going to exist in the future. And unless it changes within Muslim communities and Muslim countries, there is not going to be change anywhere else in the world. I want to bring you home to some domestic issues, and one issue that I think is very relevant to some of the beautiful books you've written about faith. In Victoria, the government's just putting in legislation this week, quite dramatically, to expand access to euthanasia. And why it's interesting and why it relates to faith is it seeks to strip away the religious conscience of medical practitioners who right now in the current law do not have to participate in euthanasia if it is against their beliefs. That will go. They'll be forced to participate in euthanasia. And there's a second element. Up until now, under the current law, if you have a terminal illness and you want to end your life, you have to raise euthanasia with your doctor. Well, under these proposed changes by Victorian Labor, your health practitioner can suggest it to you. So you are terminal, you are at your most vulnerable, and someone you trust, your medical advisor, your doctor, your nurse, your palliative care specialist, they will be allowed to say to you, why don't you just end your life? Come on, make it easier on your friends and family. What do you think about these changes?
Well, Peter, these are very, very profound and troubling issues. It is relevant to that recent book we talked about of mine, How Christians Can Succeed Today, Reclaiming the Genius of the Early Church, because the early Christians stood against all these kind of practices in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, killing old people, killing unwanted infant babies, girl babies in particular, but also handicapped children. We're seeing a massive movement across the West to marginalise human nature, to trivialise human nature. And what the Victorian legislation is doing is trivialising the human condition by saying, you know, why don't you just get out of the way? If you're an old person and you've got dependents who need your resources and you're feeling a bit unwell, why don't you just get out of the way? Now, of course, they're saying you still have to be in extremis, but everywhere in the world where we've seen euthanasia legislation introduced, there has been a progressive weakening of the safeguards. We know older people who come from a generation where duty was much more emphasised than narcissism as it is today, already feel guilty about the amount of care and attention that they need from their families. And so if this was meant to be a procedure in extremis for people in terrible distress who cry out to their medical practitioners and family and say, I can't bear this suffering anymore, please release me from it. Instead, it now becomes a menu of options. You have, okay, here's palliative care, here's pain control and so forth. And the other thing is, human psychology is that you need help over the moments of peak distress. So if a person is having a bit of distress and you say, well, you know, you can end this all by killing yourself and we'll help you. Well, I mean, this is absolutely appalling. And then the other side of it, removing the right of people with conscience, people with issues of conscience, doctors, nurses and other practitioners to refuse to participate in these kill teams is outrageous. And I think the Christian churches should hold big demonstrations at their hospitals, should go down to the front of the Parliament. I'd like to see the Catholic and Anglican archbishops leading demonstrations on the steps of Parliament. They are being forced to kill people needlessly who shouldn't die, and inevitably that will put pressure on innocent people who don't want to die, and they ought to take a very strong stand on this publicly.
All right, I'll leave it there, Greg. But of course, if people are watching at home and you feel strongly about this, please call your Victorian politician and tell them what you think. We'll leave it there. As I said, Greg, thanks for joining me tonight.